It's Monday, the 19th of May, 2025. I have not been on for a little video for a while, so I decided to just jump on this evening and give a little bit of an update as I see things. I want to discuss the topic of mass psychosis. Ireland today is in a state of hypnosis. People just cannot see what's happening because it's just impossible for them to see them. About 45 years ago, there was a fellow going round Ireland. His name was Barry Sinclair. He was a hypnotist. And he would go to the local halls and he would bring all the local people together and call a few fools up on stage and whatnot and hypnotize them. And it was a great night's entertainment for one and all indeed. So he came to my local area, and needless to say, I was about 15 or 16 or whatever at the time. I considered myself smarter than Barry Sinclair, so I decided I would go up on the stage as well. And I believed he was not going to be able to hypnotize me. And as usual, of course, I was correct. He was not able to hypnotize me. But I did go along with the charade just to get an understanding on how this process worked. It was very, very interesting. He played on human emotions, the fact that people were afraid to stand out from the crowd, and also they were afraid, once they make a decision, to have it proven to everybody, but most importantly to themselves, that they had made a stupid mistake. So he had about 15 or 20 people up on the stage, and he would seek first to get them to do a very small little thing, like scratch their nose with a thumb or whatever. Once he had them doing the small little thing, it was easy enough to get them to do the next thing. And as it increased and went on, the requests were getting more embarrassing and absurd. But the people continued on regardless. Now, there were a few that refused, and he would have had thought up an excuse to send them back down to the audience and made them look stupid, and he was very, very smart. But I stayed with it anyway just to see how everything went. And that was how the process worked. Now, at the end, of course, everybody would be at the stage where they would just be hoping that their ordeal would be over and then they could go home. But they would not give up towards the end of it, because then they were admitting to themselves that they had been had and fooled. And that is exactly what is seen in Ireland. It's the same little process. When the jib jab was being introduced, for example, people were asked to do a very small thing, and they were asked to be part of the crowd, the collective. You can help. You do your little part and we can defeat this monster. And once they cottoned on to that, it was very easy to go to the next step. The next step, of course, was simple. Let's all just stay inside for 2 weeks. And of course, everybody went on for the 2 weeks. After the 2 weeks, of course, the next thing was it was restrictions on your travel, and it increased over and over. But people that had already boarded that train just refused to get off. Had that train continued, it would be its logical conclusion that people would be sending people to concentration camps. Now, if you think that is absurd, there was actually a radio personality, I think it was down in Dundalk or someplace, and he was on the radio insisting that anybody that had not taken the prod would be ostracized or whatnot. Now, maybe it was just coincidence. I do not know. I don't know everything. But this fellow died of a turbo cancer not too long ago. So, the Lord have mercy on his soul. That's all I've got to say about that fellow. But the process is similar. So we had a couple of events in the past week that were very, very notable indeed. There was some protest going on up in Donegal, and there was this, that, and a bit of hullabaloo and whatnot. It just so happened that two migrants lost their lives in a drowning event up in Donegal. That situation was taken and it was portrayed and put out into the media, and from the very word go, it was obvious to anybody that it was just a concocted sort of narrative. The initial story was that three young people got into difficulty while swimming in Lough Swilly in the North Atlantic. That, of course, was absurd to begin with, because who is swimming in the North Atlantic in May in Ireland? But nonetheless, we waited for more details. The details, sure enough, did come out, and they weren't swimming at all in Lough Swilly. It would appear as if they were playing some soccer and the ball went into the ocean and the three fellows foolishly decided to go in after the ball. We do not know whether these guys were even able to swim. Who knows? But the bottom line is, it should be common sense that if your ball goes into the ocean, you do not go in after it, especially all three or whatever. And the obvious question to be asked was, when those fellows was brought out of their natural environment, a landlocked country of Zimbabwe, at one time known as Rhodesia, capital of Salisbury, that's all gone now, it's Harare. But anyway, another country then, Nigeria. Nigeria is a big place. I don't know whether this youngster was from the coastal area or whether he was from 200 miles inland. Who knows? But the bottom line is, anyway, they should have been told and given the common sense, and they didn't have any common sense. That was a tragedy. Now, when a tragedy like this happens, of course, especially if they're from a migrant community, they're elevated into sainthood straight away. Needless to say, it was de rigueur to go to the local politician. I think he was Sinn Féin or whatever he was. It doesn't make any difference what he was. But needless to say, he issued the same platitudes and empty verses and rest in peace, and the communities in shock and they're devastated, etc., etc. Now, the reality is the community was not in devastation whatsoever. If you think that's a bit harsh, well, ask yourself, what was the names of these two fellows that got drowned? Nobody knows, and the reality is nobody cares either. A few days back, Saturday I think it was, there was a youngster drowned in Sligo. I think he was 7 years of age. He had an unusual name, so perhaps he was from overseas as well. But for whatever reason, poor youngster that got drowned in Sligo was not getting any news. It was just a statistic. People move on. They don't really care about it. There was another death down in Wexford, another drowning down there. That was that. But the interesting about it was the event was portrayed in such and such a manner. Another strange event happened when a Garda was killed in what some say the line of duty. Other people say he was acting very erratically indeed, maybe as a process of having a result of having a mental breakdown or whatever. We don't know. We'll wait for toxicology reports. But his death was taken and was blown into a magnificent sort of a gala event, if you want to use that term, even though it shouldn't be used in that term in that event. The funeral was attended by the president. It was attended by the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach. There must have been 1,000 Gardaí lined up. This was bigger than Jimmy Carter's funeral. And this fellow was elevated out of all proportion. The reason being, of course, because nobody wanted to ask the obvious questions. How did this guy end up getting killed out on the M50? There's a lot of questions there. Also, of course, there's no mention whatsoever of the the motorbike rider. He was on the Suzuki 1000. That in Ireland is a fairly big bike. Has a top speed of something like 185 miles an hour. I don't know what speed he was going. It weighs about 500 pounds. I checked it out. Anyway, you cannot just step out in front of this and stop him with your hand up. That's insanity. And the man lost his life. And that was that. Now, while this was going on, it's very interesting too that there is a case down in Kerry that can only be described as a farce out of all proportions. A farmer disappears 8 weeks ago. I've been following this case because it was an unusual case, because if a farmer disappears, if he's gone for more than a day or two, maybe he's gone on a bit of a bender or whatever. Farmers just do not disappear. So it would not have taken Columbo to say to himself, well, this guy is gone now and he ain't coming back. And he ain't gone too far. He's gone at the most 300 or 400 meters from his house. Otherwise, he would have driven there. His body is in that radius. Where could it be? Well, you're going to search wells, you're going to search crevices, you're going to search bog holes if that's the nature of the land. And most certainly, if there were slurry tanks involved, you are going to search the slurry tank. I believe there was 2 slurry tanks involved. Being in the slurry tank not necessarily means foul play. Slurry tanks emit very dangerous, noxious fumes and it can kill exceedingly fast. And it is a great danger in farms, and many people have lost their lives. For whatever reason, the slurry tanks were not emptied and searched thoroughly. How that could have been allowed to happen? Well, that is a mystery. Now, if there is foul play, there's you don't need to be Columbo, as I said, to solve this case. You can just go to two Irish proverbs, which are "No good deed goes unpunished," and the other proverb is "Two is company, three is a crowd." So you don't have to look too far for the culprit, in my opinion. Anyway, so that is that. Now, if this is as it appears, it has got to be the greatest screw up of all time in Ireland. And perhaps that being known to have been the case was why the other man's death was elevated to such a high situation indeed. Now, there's no shortage of insanity in Ireland, and there's no shortage of people that seem to be to be afraid of actually telling the truth about anything. It is most amazing to watch from afar. You will have leaders there given out against racists and whatnot. And if you are protesting a dwelling that's going to house 70 Somalians, you are in effect a racist. I saw it on Facebook. I says, well, you're a racist because you call them Somalians. If they were Jehovah Witnesses from Sweden, you'd have no problem with it at all. And yet the man that's on the Facebook cannot just make that little bit of a connection between that obvious fact. Then I saw another fellow giving a speech up in Carrick Cross or whatever after the event, and some youngster got up and he gave a speech against racists, etc., etc. The other fellow, the older man, got up and he gave a speech castigating him about being racist and saying he's not racist. And immediately followed up with a big screed about the people from Eastern Europe that likes to wander from A to B to C. We know who they are. There's a song about them, My Sharona. But anyway, until people actually shake themselves off, and getting back to Barry Sinclair must have left the show without clicking his fingers, because a lot of people are still under this cloud of hypnotism and they cannot just shake themselves out from this. And that was just some random thoughts now on the situation in Ireland. We have yet to see a leader step forward to actually say what needs to be said. The closest, as I see from here, to a real leader in Ireland with the intellect and the wisdom and the ability to speak is John Waters. Unfortunately, he did not do very well in the election, but he was too good for the electorate, maybe, whatever. But that is John Waters. Until we see a similar person stepping forward, we will not be making progress as I see it from here. Thank you very much for watching.